Appearing and disappearing. Okay, Pavel, I think it's a good time to start. If that's okay with
Yes.
you.
Okay. So hello, everybody. Thank you, lady, for organizing this. This must be really an incredible task to manage people from all over the world like this on our screen, and also physically in Nisyros. So it's a really remarkable situation we find ourselves in. Thank you for coming. There'll be room for questions. I will also try to make this a little more brief than a normal lecture. I'll explain why somewhere in the middle. So if you allow me, I'll begin. So hello, everyone. Are you all here? Just like to see some reaction. Yes?
Yes,
Perfect.
yes.
Yeah, hello. Okay, great. Let's try this. So hello, my name is Pavel Jech, and this is Message in a Bottle. And do we have the screen on?
Yes, we do.
Okay, I only see myself. Now I don't see anything. Okay, yes. So under normal circumstances, we would be all sharing time together on that magical remote island of Nisyros. So again, hello, Nisyros, everyone who's there. This year, only some of us are on a remote island willingly, and others are stranded in far-flung places around the world, not so willingly. Aside from its inspiring beauty, we gather on this remote island so that we can have some isolation, but also so that we can be all together. And it's this dance between isolation and becoming part of a community that is essential to our process of developing stories. That interplay is very important. Writers need a time to be solitary, introspective, reflective, and space to be inspired and creative. But they also need feedback and affirmation and a little bit of help and support sometimes to find their way. Something that becoming an interactive member at a group in the MFI provides about becoming a participant. And MFI and Nisyros provides both that space for introspection and that space for cooperation. Sometimes in normal years, some writers arrive here, I mean by that Nisyros, not my apartment in Orange, California, thinking that this experience of this workshop will primarily be about the splendid isolation. Perhaps some would have a feeling that they do not need to fully engage or participate in their group. But to that thought, I would like to remind you that that stories are often communal constructions. And because they're so highly valued, we often create myths about the storytellers. So like the famous myth of Homer, this myth of the blind, solitary genius who recited the Iliad and the Odyssey straight from his head to his receptive listeners. In fact, these great epics were not written by one man named Homer, but were handed down and retold by numerous anonymous storytellers. Scholars, I believe, say that this is the result of a 400-year story development process. Okay, so hopefully your screenplays will not take that long to develop, but it is good to remind ourselves that we are not only here to act as a solitary, isolated genius, that participating in this workshop, traveling from one island to another is more like an odyssey, an adventure with lots of events in which one eventually discovers their story and how best to tell it. So now this year, everything is different because of the pandemic. That balance between isolation and community has been disrupted. We now all of us have isolation, plenty of it, more than some of us ever expected, but we still need to have that journey. And for that, we need the community. And that's the big benefit of MFI. Writers gathering, communicating, sharing, supporting each other. So when I was thinking about this extreme situation, I thought about other extreme situations of isolation, like people on a deserted island who are desperate to reach out and to connect. And in the popular myth, they write a message, they put it in a bottle, and hope that someone gets it, even if that journey takes years and years. If the message in the bottle gets through, it's something of a miracle. It's kind of like making a movie, actually. In previous lectures here, I attempted to select some theme that captures the MFI process. Last year, for instance, if you were here or there, my lecture was Truth in Dramaturgy in the Era of Fake News. And 10 years ago, in my first lecture at MFI, it was 10 jokes that will teach you everything you need to know about screenwriting. Indeed, the atmosphere was much lighter at that time. This year, because of our isolation and because of our desire to connect, I selected the topic message in a bottle. And what I did was I asked our other trainers to each send me their message in a bottle. And basically I asked them, what do you need to urgently convey about screenwriting? What do our participants need to know about this process? We'll find out soon if I understood them. They will let you know if I didn't. But before I get to their messages, allow me for a moment to contemplate what a couple of legendary Czech filmmakers might have sent as their message in a bottle. So next slide, please. The first would be from Esther Krumbachová. She was an art director primarily and also a costume designer, but she was also a screenwriter and a director. She was a great collaborator on many of the classic Czech New Wave films. Someone who understood, who lived and understood the value of community in creating a story. And next slide, please. So Esther Krumbachová, she once said that the creation of the script is like the flight of a bird or the flight of an airplane. So you can, that's an airplane. I haven't seen one of those in a while, but there it is. I'm looking at it through my bottle. You need, for a bird or an airplane to fly, you need both wings. And in her metaphor, one wing is the creative, the irrational, the instinctive, the personal. And the other wing is the rational, the analytical, the methodological. You can't fly with just one wing. You can't, according to her analogy, you can't just fly based on pure inspiration. You can't fly just by knowing the rules of creating a script. You need both wings to fly. And I think this is always something we return to when we're in workshops like this one. The metaphor of two wings needed for flight, I think also captures that balance I was talking about of writers needing to find a balance between isolation and community. And in the process of creating our stories, most writers need to find that connection between these two wings working together to take flight like the bird. So Esther Krumbachová in person was actually much more of the free-spirited, creative type. She was kind of famous for her nightlife. But the next person I'm going to reference, the next slide, thank you, was the more rational, sturdy type. He was a director. His name was Otakar Vávra. He was a legendary Czech film director who died about 10 years ago at the age of 100. He was one of the founding teachers of my former school at FAMU in Prague. He was teaching there from 1946 to 2011. He was the history of Czech cinema, both the good and the bad. His year-long lecture course on filmmaking, which he taught for over 50 years, started with, the first lecture started with the building of the pyramids and the analysis of the architecture of the Acropolis. He was very old school. And this master teacher must have had hundreds of messages in a bottle to send us. But here's one that I find remarkably relevant for the environment that we now find ourselves living in. One of the issues that Vávra explored was the psychophysiological aspects of cinematic storytelling. He would claim that the reason why stage performances are generally longer than movies has to do with physicality. Audiences can maintain their focus on live performers longer than they can on the ethereal light and shadows of the screen. The lighter the substance before them, the sooner the audience becomes wary. And the filmmakers need to be aware of that. And I think the same message can be said of meetings in person versus meetings in Zoom. I'm often thinking of Vavra's observation as people today complain of Zoom fatigue. And more generally, this message is important not to forget the psychophysiological experience of the audience. So that's a reason why you might find your group meetings will make you feel more exhausted than even usual. And it's a reason for me to keep this moving and not too long. So now I'll go on to our trainers. The first trainer to respond to me and send a message was a FAMU student himself at one time. I'm pretty sure that like many of his classmates, he managed to avoid Vavra's lectures while there. That person was, next slide, please. Jan Fleischer. This was his message that he sent in the bottle. Screenwriting is storytelling. It's about people and life. It's not directing a film. Many of us who come to MFI are also directors or producers or both. And with this end goal in mind, having a compelling and celebrated feature film, it can be tempting to start planning the production of your film immediately. It can be very enjoyable to already see this movie in your head and to indulge in the details. But this can be distracting as well. As Jan's message in a bottle tells us, the work to be done here at MFI is mainly to discover and craft the story, your story. At this stage, it is more important to contemplate life and real people than to play around with the fancy, shiny objects that also decorate our films. Focusing on storytelling is the most beneficial and effective way to utilize this intensive time with your trainers and your fellow participants. Jan wrote a book on screenwriting called Of Scripts and Life, and I think MFI provides it usually. His book outlines a step-by-step process of script writing from initial inspiration to final draft. But in parallel, the book also reveals much of the story of Jan's life. It's a fascinating and very useful book, and it's practical not only because of the writing steps and tips that Jan gives us, but also because Jan reminds us through example that there's nothing that can replace our lived experience. Lived experience is a critical ingredient of making our stories, providing substance and authenticity. So that is what I make of Jan's message in his bottle, that at the start of every story is a profound human experience. After all, that's what compels someone to invest their hopes in a short message, put it in a bottle, and wait as it sets off for the long journey into the unknown. The next message in a bottle to reach me was from Anna. Internet was faster than the bottle, by the way, and here's her message. Next slide, please. So Anna writes in her message, story, story, story. We all agree that story is of essential importance. That's why we came here, to make sure that our stories are working. Anna's repetition of this word reminds me that the concept of story, which is a shared and unified experience, is actually multifaceted and open to interpretation. Different authorities provide different definitions of what a story is. Since Anna mentioned three, I will mention three separate experts. The first is the legendary Frank Daniel, who said that each story, all stories, they're all about this one single thing. Somebody wants something badly and has trouble getting it. That one sentence clearly states the dramatic elements needed for a story: a central character, a goal, and obstacles to make it intriguing. As you analyze and reflect upon your own stories, you will surely not only touch upon, but also struggle with each of these elements. And if you're missing some, people in your group will be sure to tell you. Even a bottle's journey becomes more interesting if the path is long and arduous. And a bottle's not even a character, but the story is interesting when it hits obstacles along the way. The second definition is from the famous screenwriting guru, Robert McKee. He writes, and he says quite often, that every story is the same situation. He also has a definition which covers all stories. And his is when subjective expectations crash into objective reality. Someone pens a vital personal message in which they invest all their hope and then plunges that bottle into the vast sea. It's just one small example of a subjective expectation of a stranded soul colliding with that objective reality of the endless, unforgiving ocean. You'll find as well in your own subjective expectations colliding with the objective realities in your group. Hopefully this dialectic of your subjective expectations clashing against the objective feedback is going to enhance your stories. And the third definition comes from an MFI legend and the original head of studies of MFI, Lewis Cole. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, thank you. There's the summary of the story. So there's somebody wants something badly, has trouble getting it, when subjective expectations crash into objective reality. And MFI's Lewis Cole it was a day like any other day until. What Lewis meant was that every story really gets its start once the status quo is disrupted. You may find yourself spending a lot of time discussing and exploring the status quo world of your story and of your characters when you're working in your groups. But at some point, you will need to disrupt that status quo. And only then will you start to have a story. So as Anna reminds us with her message, story, story, story. And here at MFI, filmmaking is always about story, no matter which of the definitions you choose to follow. So in response to Anna's message, Michel sent his own message in a bottle. Next slide, please. Same message, just replace story with stories, plural. Smiley emoji, Michel. By the way, I wonder when the first emojis appeared in messages in a bottle. If it was, which century that happened in. So television, that's what Michel's means by this. Television, or more precisely streaming today, is taking over classic cinema. This is being accelerated by the pandemic era. After mostly focusing on features, I myself have had the opportunity to work on TV projects in recent years. TV writing depends a lot on collaboration. There is much less of that splendid isolation for the TV writer. TV writers, as you know, they often work in the writer's room together. When they do write alone, they usually have to match the voice of the show and not follow their own voice. And it's very common for TV writers to be rewritten by someone else. One partner I collaborate with who is very experienced in television often yells, and this is his own message in a bottle, it's not a movie, it's TV. So I've given a lot of thought recently about what makes TV different from features. And one thing I noticed from my experience of working on feature scripts, including working at MFI, is that a big part of what we are always trying to do is figure out how to close the story. Creating an ending is not only a necessity of a feature story, but having an ending has many, many other implications, not the least of which is an understanding of what the story is really about. Also, in feature scripts, we are crafting the main character's journey, paying attention to the experience they have, and trying to reach a definitive conclusion. The goal of a good TV series is the opposite of this. The question is not how to end the story or the character's journey, but instead how to keep them going and going. Stories, stories, stories. like Michel writes in his message in a bottle. And why do we want to keep these going? It's the characters. If we are intrigued by the characters, we want to keep watching them. We want to keep living with them. Much of the work we do in the classical work of the workshop is regarding the exploration of our characters and finding ways to enhance their dramatic potential. So if you remember Frank Daniel's definition of story, somebody wants something badly, he talks about a character wanting something, about the character's goal or objective. And he gave a label to this conscious pursuit. It's called the want. And this want defines the structure of the story according to his methodology. But Frank Daniel's also credited with another message in a bottle, and that's the other side of the character, something he labeled the need. The need is that subconscious aspect of the character, which ultimately has to be addressed. As you find, characters are usually not aware of this subconscious aspect of themselves. Just as in real life, we are not always aware of the subconscious forces within us. Until within the story, they are confronted by the objective reality presented in a dramatic situation. In Frank Daniel's approach to story, this is a very brief summary, the want drives the main tension, it drives the main structure, while the need provides the resolution for the character and for the story. So what we find is that in the construction of dramatic features, very often the character's want and need are in direct conflict. The character is often driven by a want that opposes what they actually really need. So by the end of a feature film, this tension is resolved. And if, for instance, this film is concluding with a happy ending, the character needs has become fulfilled, even if the want, that objective of the character, has not been achieved. Now, in an engaging TV series built around compelling characters, this tension between want and need actually should never be resolved. Instead, this tension creates the energy that creates the series and the characters moving onward. It's story after story after story. Often in a TV series, we find that lead characters have a professional life and a personal life which is in conflict. So I'll cite 3 examples to make this more concrete. For example, Breaking Bad, many of us know that brilliant series. The central character has an ongoing tension throughout the 6 seasons, throughout every episode, between his goal to provide for his family as Walter White and his need to fulfill his darker ambitions as Heisenberg. In The Crown, a popular series currently, the Queen, who's the central character, but also other characters have the similar dynamic. She lives with a constant tension between her duties to the crown and her personal need for self-realization. And this is the conflict that generally provides the structure to every single story, and it's never resolved in her character, therefore we can move on to the next story. And the same thing is happening in Fleabag, another popular streaming program these days. The main character has reoccurring goals to disrupt and sabotage the unfair world around her. But these goals conflict with her own personal need of accepting herself. So these tensions between want and need are never resolved in these series. Episodes and stories come to conclusions, but the main character's need is never resolved. Once that is achieved, like in the final episode of Breaking Bad, when Walter White finally succumbs to Heisenberg, the series is over. So, as you know from your own work, the inner dynamics of characters are endlessly fascinating. And indeed, here is the message which was been sent to us from Christina. So next slide, please. Christina, smiley, that they should be curious to get to know and love these characters. The characters are not chess pieces in a story, but people they should care about. So one prominent phenomenon of our current times is that of cancel culture. I think everyone's aware of cancel culture. we find many formerly esteemed or even less than esteemed historical figures being reconsidered and sometimes discarded, canceled. For instance, Aristotle is currently under assault by cancel culture because of his arguments that slavery has a benefit for the people who are being enslaved, actually. People object to that. But even before cancel culture, Aristotle's dramatic principles have been confronted by those who strongly disagree with them. For instance, Aristotle's famous claim that plot is more important than character, and that the idea that characters exist to serve the plot. This has been canceled about a century ago by Laios Egri in his book, The Art of Dramatic Writing, where he argues that characters are more important. He thinks that to say plot is more important than character is complete nonsense. And Egri argues that you cannot replace, for instance, the characters of Hamlet from Hamlet and Romeo from Romeo and Juliet. You can't interchange them. If you put the brooding Hamlet into Romeo and Juliet, the character would never run out and even meet Juliet. He would not be impulsive enough. He'd just be thinking about it. If you put the impulsive Romeo into the Hamlet story, he would get himself killed at the very beginning. So either way, you would have no story. So character determines plot, according to Egri, not the other way. So regardless where Christina might stand in this intellectual argument, her message is a tangible warning to writers not to make your stories all about the plot. After all, the journey of the message of a bottle is much more interesting, not because of the path it takes, but because of the characters. Who sent the bottle and why? And who received it? How were they affected by this? Do the characters connect or not? So let's not get too distracted by the fancy twists and turns of a bottle and instead focus on the people behind the message. Christina's appellation that we focus on character does not mean, however, that we should idealize our characters. Far from it. Milena Jelinek, one of the original MFI trainers, would make this warning. Be careful not to love your characters too much. Do not forget to see their faults. If your characters are too close to perfect or are protected by you, the writer, you'll have much less interesting characters and a much weaker story. Christina's message in a bottle also reminds me of the famous Czech literary character that some of you might know, the good soldier Švejk. The Švejk character from the early 20th century masterpiece is known for his folksy one-liners. He says a lot of funny one-liners. He's kind of a comic character. My favorite is when Švejk is sent to World War I to the frontline trenches. And as the enemy starts shooting, Švejk stands up and waves to the other side, yelling, "Hey, don't shoot. There are people over here." That simple message in a bottle is another reminder of what's most important in our stories, the people. And so I'm also reminded by Švejk's wisdom from our next message, or our next slide, please. So this is the message that Dimitris sent. He decided to share with us the trailer from the film Volcano Man. It's the Will Ferrell movie on Netflix about an Icelandic contestant in the Eurovision contest. I don't think we can play this over Zoom, so you can only see this poster inside this bottle. The clip is a rather entertaining song. Maybe Dimitris will show it to you when you're together in the group. So actually, at one point, I was thinking about doing a lecture based on famous rock songs, because we already have the message in the bottle from the Police. And other classic rock songs also tell us about script writing. If you read Jan Fleischer's book, for instance, you'll learn about his early encounters with Mick Jagger. You can't always get what you want, the Rolling Stones song is a perfect lesson for a screenwriter, especially its final refrain. If you try sometimes, you might find you get what you need. So if you listen to the lyrics of that song, you'll see the dynamic between the want and need, which I was attempting to describe earlier. The Beatles can be helpful as well. For instance, The Long and Winding Road describes the process of writing a script. However, even though writers often feel like this, I would not recommend their song, Happiness is a Warm Gun. So why did Dimitris share this message with us? Why did he share it? Is it because of the island Nisyros is a volcano? Is it because Dimitris regards this workshops with participants from all over Europe as the script writing version of the Eurovision contest? Is it simply because it was late and he was feeling giddy? Well, you'll have to ask him in your sessions or over one of those virtual beers that we're encouraging you to have. My educated guess is that Dimitris's message is about holding on to your vision, about respecting the purity of your instincts, trusting that they will lead you somewhere. It's a message about perseverance and endurance, which reminds me of a message from my lecture last year, which I want to share with you. Next slide, please. So if you remember last year, my lecture was on truth and dramaturgy in the era of fake news. And this was one of the slides from that lecture. It says, it's from CNN, and it says, the president of the United States is saying 12 untrue things a day. Think about it this way. Trump is lying more every day than a majority of Americans wash their hands. According to data from the Soap and Detergent Association, yes, that's a real thing, just 50% of Americans wash their hands in excess of 10 times a day. So I was using that to make a point last year. This was from June 2019. Hand washing was a frivolous way for a columnist to make an important point about lying. But today, hand washing is not so frivolous. People wash their hands much, much more. And also the amount of presidential lying has actually grown. So today that connection between hand washing and really, public health and that with presidential lies has a much deeper meaning. It's more consequential and more tragic. So who would have thought this a year ago? So my message about screenwriting here is this. Hold on to that idea that seems interesting to you, even if it's just a bit peculiar. A core meaning of your idea just might achieve a more profound meaning, even with all the unpredictable changes to come. Our core messages endure and may even gain significance over time. So speaking about the nature of that journey that you will embark on, I'd like now have the next slide and the next message from Dimitrios. P.S. That was his email message in a bottle. Jan, always great to build tension and suspense. So what Dimitrios is reminding us about is the other tools of the craft of screenwriting. Yes, you will explore a lot of what your story is about, but you can't always ignore considerations of how to tell your story. Devices like tension and suspense have a great impact on storytelling. All the strategic tools a storyteller uses need to be carefully considered because they can affect the story itself. Last year was the first year I also had an opportunity to witness Dimitrios at work when we were leading a group together. And I noticed that Dimitrios is incredibly thorough in discussing writers' ideas. He looks at your idea from all angles, all directions, from the early stages to later implications. not just the storytelling strategies, but at other aspects of production, music, colors, casting, and so on. In his journey of development, the bottle circles all the oceans of the world over and over. Demetrius is a great explorer of story. In your process, you too will need to explore and acquaint yourself with the vast ocean of your story world. It's impossible for you to know every detail, but you should develop an awareness and a respect for the richness of your not fully knowable world. Knowing the contours of your vast ocean will help you find your way as you chart the unique course of your own personal story. So the message in the bottle is something like, the journey is vast and long, full of not yet discovered possibilities. Which brings me back to the beginning in a way, like many journeys, they go back to the beginning. So next slide, please, from Nicos. Nicos. Now, about my students, I'm always trying to convince them that they need to know clearly what they want to say before they start thinking about how to say it. What is their story about? Why is it so important to them as filmmakers? First thing I notice about Nicos's message is its emphasis on dialogue. I don't mean script dialogue, but the dialogue taking place within the development process. His phrase, "I'm trying to convince," indicates that our MFI process is not about dictation, but about a respectful dialogue. Sometimes the process of working with a trainer can feel like dictation. And at times, we, the trainers, can be guilty of this when we are assuming too much of the role of the master, telling you what must be. But of course, your project is your project. So a master telling you what you must do can sometimes be quite an obstacle. Sometimes, however, the problem can be the reverse, and the writer is looking too much to the trainer for the answers. And that's not the trainer's job either. So this impulse for one-way communication can come from both sides, but what we really need is the dialogue. A dialogue between writer and trainer is the process of discovery. The trainer communicates with you. It might be advice, an idea, a provocation, a question because they do know the answer, or a question because they don't know the answer. Imagine that. The feedback your trainers give you is not usually about like or dislike, because this is not about their taste. It's about trusting your taste. An interesting question is if the process works better if the trainer and the participant happen to share the same taste. On one hand, this can make their communication quicker and smoother. On the other hand, if they don't share the same taste and they acknowledge this, this might actually lead to more honest and useful appraisal. So now to the second part of Nicos's sentence. They need to know clearly what they want to say before they start thinking about how to say it. So that's really one of the major aims of this process of dialogue. After a long and bumpy and circuitous journey, finally you open that bottle and you discover the essence of what you wanted to say. Sometimes we can say that this message in the bottle, we can give it a label, we can call it the theme. So I'd like to say a word about theme. I find it useful to make the distinction that a theme is not a thesis statement. Theme and thesis statement are two different things. A thesis statement is something that you declare and then you go out and prove it. But a theme is something that you discover. You don't know it at the beginning, you find it out in the process. The process of thinking, writing, rewriting, and thanks to your work with MFI, by having a dialogue with the trainer and with the people in your group. It's a dialogue, it's a process. As Nico says, the goal is to find what is important to you. Hopefully, if you endure, your journey will be worth it. Finally, so next slide, please. Before I conclude, I would like to mention our dear friend and our cherished mentor, one of the founding trainers of MFI, who unfortunately passed away 3 months ago, Milena Jelinek. Milena loved Nisyros. She came here every year as a trainer. And 5 years ago, Milena gave a fantastic lecture about at Nisyros about chase and escape. In this lecture, she made the argument that every story at its heart is about one of these two dramatic relationships. It's either about a chase or about an escape. She made a convincing argument that every story is about one of these two things. She cited several films as examples. Some Like It Hot, Casablanca, great films. She loved the classics. But she also revealed how these themes related to her own personal life. Chase and escape also described her personal relationships. One to her homeland, which initially she escaped for life, and then later couldn't avoid returning to on a regular basis. And also to her husband, Fred, who loved this island so much that he made sure Milena would come, even if she wasn't always up for it every year. And with whom she also shared relationships, which could sometimes be characterized as chase and escape. I think she shared this message with us, not just to tell us what was important to her personally, but to remind us that in discovering what your story is about, you are also uncovering your own personal themes and values, and that you need to share what's important to you. Discovering the meaning of your stories can be a very lonely process. It's like being stranded on a deserted island, or like floating like a small solitary bottle in the vast and violent ocean. But that bottle, you are carrying a vital message. One that your trainers and your fellow participants will be delighted to help you reveal and discover. So thank you. The next slide is just a summary of some of the messages in the bottle. Share what's important to you. Your message is vital. Characters and connections are more important than the twists and turns. Your voice will endure no matter what happens on your journey. Your core message will gain significance over time. You are on a journey to discover your stories and your theme, and you're on a journey to better understand yourself. Next slide, please. So thank you for receiving my message in a bottle. Thank you very much. If there's any questions, we can discuss.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Sorry.
much.
Thank you. Let's applaud. I'm also applauding.
Sorry that we're not all together. I'm very sorry about that.
No, it went very well. I don't know how it feels to not be with a live audience. So, I just want to say openly that I really like the lecture, and I don't know. Thank you, Pavel.
Thank you.
For putting things into perspective. Does anybody wants to ask something or start a conversation?
Yes, can we
Yes.
say something about like the difference about series and TV in those days and the feature films? Like, it's the ending, but you see any other different like layers in the story that separate them?
Sorry, I did not hear the entire question.
Like it's different, the ending of the television and the films, like you see that every time, it's like, it's different, or are other layers too, like?
Okay, I think I understand. I'll try to repeat the point because I was shoving a lot into that. There's so many different facets of streaming, and I'm only talking about some shows. But I think one of the ways a series can become enduring is with a compelling character. And what we're always trying to do when we're writing a feature, if it's a character-based story, and that's often what the goal of the MFI projects is is to give a complete testimony to an experience of a character, that there is some experience that they go through which has a beginning, middle, and end, and there's some resolution. And that resolution really is, it turns out that it's ultimately about something within them, something subconscious, something we call the need. It's whether they achieve that or not, which closes that experience. And that can be very gratifying, no matter, as an audience, no matter what happens to the characters. Because that is really essential to our own experience in our own lives. Very often in our own experience, we don't know what we need. We do things without knowing why we do it. And that's one of our attractions to story is being able to understand what the need is of a character, even if they don't know it themselves. And again, in trying to craft that feature, we're often trying to enclose that experience and finish it. But in a series, we love those characters. We want them to come back again and again. And of course, every episode, if it's a well-written series and a layered series, which I think is what you're talking about, like Breaking Bad, every season has a beginning, middle, and end. Every episode has a beginning, middle, and end. Every story is closed. But what you'll notice is that those stories, they close around the plot. They close around the situation, but they don't close the character. So, the Walter White Heisenberg tension, it never ends. It only ends at the very end when they decide to end it. But he always has that tension between himself. The story is complete for one episode, or the story is complete for one season, but the character has not resolved their need. So I think that's kind of, for these, it's the same as happening in The Crown, which is a very enjoyable series. I was recently talking to writers from the BBC, and actually no one watches The Crown in England. I guess they're just, they're not interested. But for the rest of us who are not British, it's a very great, it's a very good, very well written series by Peter Morgan. But the Queen and the other characters in that story, they never resolve their inner tension. She has that tension of, she has a need of self-realization, which is very universal. We all understand that. We all want to achieve our personal ambitions and realize ourselves. But she has a duty to her job and to the Crown and to, this very formal responsibility that she has to hold. And whenever the dramatic moments in that always are around that tension. And so there's many, many stories they tell. It's always the same situation, and always it lives to go on another day. Her need is never resolved. The story happens, it's like some encounter with Churchill, or it's some battle about her sister's marriage, whatever story they try to tell. They don't finish it. They finish that story, but the character's not resolved, and she goes on to live another story. Does that answer your question or not?
Yeah, exactly. But it's not that like an extra attribute like series have, like if you have other characters like her sister or Churchill that you can invest in and say their story. Like in The Crown with Churchill, his background, like his painting and his lost kid, how that affects him. Like in a film, you cannot do that so much, invest in other characters. You have the side characters that push the story. But in a series, you can like do other circles inside the story. So,
yes, you're absolutely right. That's another advantage of the series. But what's interesting about series, like the Queen or like Fleabag, is very often the other characters have a very similar tension within them. Thematically, they have the same kind of problem or need. It's like in Fleabag, her sister's character, I don't remember her name now, she kind of has an exaggerated, a more extreme version of the problem that the Fleabag character has. And in The Crown, yes, sometimes it's a story about Philip, or sometimes it's a story about Margaret. But they also have thematically their inner tension about the need that they have is very similar. It's in the same territory as the one about the Crown, about the Queen. But her character is never resolved. Yes, you can resolve, like you could tell a story about Eden, the prime minister, in one of the stories and it can be finished and resolved, and his character can fail in getting his need, for instance, at the end of that episode, and he doesn't come back as a character after that. He's been resolved. But that central tension, which continues onward in other characters, especially in the prime character. So series they do give us an ability to tell many more stories. I think it's important that you don't ever resolve the conflict within the central character, and that when you focus on other characters, they have a similar thematic tension. There's a reason why these characters are together, both in movies and in feature and in series. And very often the reason why they're together is because they have they're living in the same thematic world. They have the same internal issues, just different variations of it. I'm not saying that as a permanent rule. I'm saying that often happens, and they should look for that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Can I ask a question? Sorry, just
Yes.
Chernobyl comes to mind. Is a mini-series more closer to a feature film than a full series?
Great question. I'm still waiting to watch Chernobyl. I haven't seen it yet. But a mini-series is basically, from what I'm observing, is basically, like you said, it's a feature, but a feature done in a longer format. That's the great benefit of streaming, is that it allows us to do all these different formats. But you're right. A mini-series is generally just a much longer movie. Like a recent movie that was quite popular was The Irishman. And that could have been a mini-series. It's just a very, very long movie because it's on streaming. But they could have done it as a 3-part mini-series as well. It would have been the same thing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry. Hello. Thank you. Oh. Can you? Yes?
Yes. Hello.
Hello. Yeah, thank you so much. It was very interesting. The lecture was very interesting. I'm particularly interested about the notion of the themes. I would like to ask a little more about it. What I'm understanding from what you're saying, could we say, for example, that the theme is kind of like in series, that it kind of contains opposite desires? Because I know you mentioned the want and the need, so it's a plot against the internal journey and the desire of the hero, but could we also say that they are conflicting desires of the character, that whether it would be an ethical and an impulsive conflict, or protecting a family and fulfilling ambition or whatever, but could we say they're actually desires that we carry within that are conflicting? I mean, to figure out what the theme would be
Yeah. So I'm sorry. Hello. Do you hear me? I did not hear everything from you, but I did hear one important word again and again, and that was conflict. And of course, conflict is very important for that tension. So, I mean, here, the examples I was saying were very direct conflicts between someone's inner need and their goal. The reason why I cite that is because it's so obvious and because it works so well. The important thing is that they're not aligned. One of the mistakes we make in developing a story, happens to everyone all the time, is we confuse want and need. We think we're very close to the character, we want to understand that character, and we're writing a story about that person, and what we're writing is sometimes that the character's conscious about what their need is, and the story is about the need. You'll see this in films, and actually in real life, very often we do not know what we need. That is one of the most difficult things about our existence, is to understand ourselves. So stories give us a concentrated chance, whether it's a series or a feature or a short, concentrated chance to understand that dynamic. And so as a writer, it's usually a good idea to strategically find the best possible conflict, the most direct conflict. That's why I think The Crown is working so well, even though I personally don't care about the British royal family at all. But I appreciate it as the storytelling and the drama about people, because it's such a direct conflict between duty and personal needs.
But in that case, it's quite obvious to her. I mean, there is no hidden thing that she doesn't know about the psychological. It's obvious, right? She wants to fulfill, be happy and be personally content, and the duty. I mean, there are two things that are quite obvious and outspoken, right? So
That's a good point. I mean, that's something that happens in stories, which doesn't happen so much in real life, is that stories, we create situations where the character is confronted by that. They have to face the inner part. So I think that refers to Robert McKee, who says that our subjective expectations confront objective reality. So when that's extreme, of course, we can't avoid it. What's very often happening, like in a 3-act structure, according to Frank Daniel, is at the climax at the end of second act, a character is facing a very major choice between their want and the need. They're very aware of both. And then actually what he calls Act 3 proving the need. In Act 3 of a feature script or a feature story, the character is aware of their need and now they're trying to realize it or not realize it. So yes, usually when we meet a character at the beginning in their status quo, they're not aware of this situation, but the dramatic circumstances that we create force them to become very well aware of it. And sometimes these can be extreme, but sometimes their choice is to make it less extreme. Sometimes it's a very subtle conflict. The want and the need are not so apart, but they're not aligned. So there is a tension that allows the character's inner workings to drive the story.
And so where would that be in the TV series? I mean, that realization, does it ever come in a TV series? Actually?
Well, what I'm kind of arguing is that in TV series, it lives for another day. It doesn't get resolved. Now, we kind of, after every episode of Breaking Bad or every episode of Fleabag or every episode of The Crown, we do have to kind of accept the characters forgotten a little bit of that experience before, because but they're going through a similar situation again. That need is being confronted with the plot that they've been put into. So there's a little bit of forgetfulness, but not much. But the important thing is that it never came to some conclusion. Like, you could take the first episode of Breaking Bad and make it into a film and have that finish and never go beyond that. But there's no need to, because it's such a great tension between his goal to take care of his family and his need to become this Heisenberg, that why not do it for 6 seasons and 10 episodes each season.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pavel, too. Despite the problem with the microphone,
Yeah.
you have been brilliant into understanding and replying to Aliki. So thank you also.
Hi, I wanted to ask Pavel, it's not so much a technical question. I think it has to do more with how do you see a writer or writers in general responding to social events of such magnitude, like the social distancing and the virus or a world war, or and it's always a question for me, how because we write scripts and but at the same time big social events happening, and do you think it's like business as usual, or there's is it something I don't know what were your thoughts about that, what if there's going to be a response, or if it's just I mean, I'm not saying to make films about that necessarily, but I think there's a collective memory or something, when someone goes to a cinema, he's been through that, or
So there's many things to think about in your question. I mean, one is, I do wonder, like, in the future, how much we will have to acknowledge that this happened in a story. When there's a story that you're writing now, and then, let's say it's a romantic comedy or something, or whatever, something completely different, how much will we have to acknowledge that this happened? But we'll find out. We'll know it. We'll know it when we see it. But about responding to events, it's I'll give you one example. So I was working last year in another workshop in the Czech Republic, and one of the writers was making a film. It was set slightly in the future, and all the characters, whenever they went outside, because of the environmental situation, were wearing masks. and everyone kept saying, why are they wearing masks? Like, you can't see the actors. It doesn't make sense. But every draft that he wrote of this script, it always came back to putting the masks on the characters. And suddenly, this is making sense now. Like, he didn't know why. He could never answer why. Like, why are they wearing masks? I mean, you could say something, well, the environment, I see people in some Chinese cities wearing masks. And so, in the near future, everyone in Czech Republic will be wearing masks. So he didn't really have a really great reason, but his instinct told him something, which now makes a lot of sense for the story. Now he's actually ready with a finished script to make something that's kind of relevant in this current day. And I think that personal instinct is kind of more important than just responding to current events. If you find yourself kind of responding to current events, that's maybe more of a job of a journalist than of a creator of a story. A couple of years ago, it was popular on Nisyros for sometimes people had stories about the refugee crisis. But it's because it's something that was happening a lot in the news. But it was hard to get those stories. It was hard to get them from the inside and to really make it a personal testament of the writers, even though it was something that's important and happening around us. So I think ultimately, if it's a choice between your personal instinct and what's important to you and a choice of the realities of the world, probably stick to the instinct. And if you stick to the instinct, it might make more sense. I was trying to make that joke with the hand washing. It's like, why did a reporter talk about hand washing with presidential lying? Well, now it makes much more sense. It's a health crisis, and there's a president lying. Trust your instincts and don't just follow the current trends. And this will affect stories in ways we can't imagine. And I can imagine, like, maybe 20 or 30 or 40 years from now, people writing stories about this. And I'm very curious how they will interpret it and how they will work it into the story. These, situation where someone's wearing a mask and so on. But I'm in a way, I'm a little bit more curious how they will do this in 30 years than how we will do it now. But depending on how long it goes, you might have to work it in a little bit. You might have to acknowledge that this is the world we live in.
Wow.
I had a question. I was wondering.
Hello, Christina.
Hi. In your role as an educator and working with and workshopping ideas and scripts with people online, are there any lessons that you take away for how to do this on Zoom, or what's changed?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to think about with this, lecture, which I wasn't giving much practical advice, but I was trying to remind us why we do this. I did, I know Christina from Chapman, where I have been for the last 3 years in California. And this year I had 2 classes that switched online in the middle of the semester. But because I do writing seminars, I found it wasn't such a big difference. We could still communicate one-on-one. People could react to each other's work. So fortunately, in these more intimate situations, it's not ideal, but it does work. Communication still happens. So, just try to focus on where you are. That means in the space of the workshop, not where you are with your cat in the background and everything else that's happening. That's my only advice for that. But I think it's important just like in any situation, for everyone to have the effort to participate, to not only care about your own work, but to care about the work of the others. That's really where the magic happens in MFI. So even with the distance and the strange technology, be an active participant. That's the biggest benefit we get from this. Not any specific advice from anyone, but supporting each other and responding to each other.
Thanks.
So what do you think? Should we?
I don't know. The
To
things that I'm
discuss it?
listening are actually very deep, and I think we're all thinking on how to
Yeah.
basically what we just heard, but also how to respond in the situation that we are in. And I'm guessing that's not a topic that is going to be resolved today.
No.
I hope it will be in the near future. But I do think that it's really important to try to phrase these questions and to try to work together as much as we can. And I think that a lot of filmmakers found that to be true in the past months. And things happened that we wouldn't believe in. So I don't know, people, what you want to do now. So I'm going to ask.
Well, I think it's always good to keep it briefer because, as I mentioned by Otakar Vavra, we have our attention span is a little different looking at
when
a screen
it's a real person
than being with a real person.
Yes, but you know, I guess that's a limitation you can overcome.
Yeah.
As a lot of brilliant filmmakers have found. So yes, on my part, I want to say thank you for this lecture. I have people who left their rooms and they came to see with me because I have better conditions here. So I just want to applaud and I want to say thank you, Pavel. I want to tell the people that some of you are going to have individual meetings with Pavel. And it's very great to have you on board. I love the t-shirt. Again,
I love it too.
I don't know if I will go back to seeing everybody. I see Tonya is applauding. I see the group B is applauding. I feel like applauding both ways.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
And you know what?
Appreciate it.
I like to make noise now because, you know, enough with the silent things. Yes, let's be loud, let's be loud, let's be loud.
Okay.
You can at least listen.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you. I
everyone.
appreciate that I could be part of this with you. And
Yes,
I'll see you in different ways.
Yes, and please, you know, okay, we will see you next year, but, you know, we will find a way somehow. Okay?
Okay.
Okay,
Great.
thank you everyone for coming.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. See you. Ciao, Garifalla. See you tomorrow. The link is the same.